SLT Mobitel, the connection. SLT Mobitel, the connection.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජු රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Tonight, more options. Emergency approval granted for Russia's Sputnik 5 vaccine as task force head says vaccination drive not something new.
Sri Lanka's excellent infrastructure where we have even a health worker at that level trained to vaccinate people because they have been doing it for a long period of time.
Follow the rules. The government releases a set of guidelines to follow when burying COVID-19 victims at Iranathiu Island. Fueling growth, the Hambantota port says bunkering operations will put Sri Lanka on the map as an energy hub.
We believe that this is another major step we have taken towards establishing Hambantota International Port as an energy hub.
Easygoing, the central bank reaffirms its accommodative monetary policy stance with no change in standard lending and deposit rates.
Although we do not expect a further decline in market interest rate, we certainly do not expect them to increase either in near future.
All this and much more coming up on this Thursday, the 4th of March 2021.
ඇල්කොහොල් අඩංගු hand sanitizer භාවිත කරන්න. ලෙඩ රෝග ඇති කරන විෂ බීජවලට එරෙහිව සටන් කරන්න. හඳුන්වා දීමේ මිල රුපියල් 350යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Shanila Fernando in your top stories for tonight. The National Medicines Regulatory Authority has granted emergency approval for the Russian-made Sputnik 5 vaccine. State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Channa Jayasumana says that even though the government is expecting to bring down the Sputnik 5 vaccine, it will not discontinue the use of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. In the meantime, after reports of 2 persons dying 2 days after being administered with the vaccine, Deputy Director General of Public Health Services, Dr. Hemantha Herath urged the public to not fear the vaccine as the causes of the death are yet to be determined.
356 coronavirus cases were identified from 17 districts yesterday. The Colombo district was the only district to report infections, over 100 with 104. Among yesterday's coronavirus infections were 21 Sri Lankan expatriates. Meanwhile, 204 COVID-19 infections have been confirmed so far today. Meanwhile, 351 COVID-19 infections have been confirmed so far today. In other developments, since Sri Lanka's vaccination program began on the 29th of January, over 550,000 vaccinations have been conducted so far. However, it has been reported that 2 persons from the Gampar district have passed away 2 days after receiving their jabs. Authorities say that investigations are currently being conducted to ascertain their causes of death. Speaking on the deaths, Deputy Director General of Public Health Services, Dr. Hemantha Herath, says that based on the available information, it would be wrong to assume that the duo died due to vaccine complications until the investigations prove otherwise.
දැනට අපිට ලැබිලා තියෙන තොරතුරු අනුව ඒ පුද්ගලයන් දෙදෙනා මියගෑමට ප්‍රථම දින දෙකක් පමණ කාලයකට ප්‍රථම එන්නත ලබාගෙන තියෙනවා. අනිත් පැත්තට කතා කරොත් එන්නත ලබාගෙන දින දෙකකට පසු මිය ගොස් තිබෙනවා. ඒ මිසක් මරණය සිද්ධ වුණේ එන්නත නිසාද කියන එක ගැන පොඩ්ඩක් තවම අපි විමර්ශනය කරනවා. එන්නතක් ලබා දුන්නට පස්සේ ඇතිවන්න පුළුවන් අතුරු ආබාධ සම්බන්ධයෙන් ලෝකයේ පිළිගත් ක්‍රමවේද තියෙනවා මේවා විමර්ශනය කරන්න. ඒ කරන විමර්ශනය කරන ක්‍රමවේද අනුගමනය කරමින් මේ පිළිබඳව විමර්ශනය කරලා නොබෝ දිනකින් අපිට ඒ තොරතුරු ජනතාව ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න පුළුවන්. එතෙක් අපිට මේකදී කියන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ එන්නත දීමෙන් පසුව සිදු වූ මරණයක් මිස එන්නත දීම නිසා සිදු වූ මරණයක් නෙවෙයි. අපි සියලු දෙනාගෙන්ම ඉල්ලා සිටිනවා මේ සිද්ධිය එකක් හැටියටගෙන පමණක් මේ එන්නත ලබා ගැනීමෙන් වැළකී සිටින්න අවශ්‍ය වන්නේ නැහැ. අපි මේ පිළිබඳව අවශ්‍ය දැනුවත් කිරීම කරනවා. එතෙක් මේ එන්නත් ලබා ගැනීමේ ක්‍රියාවලියට දිගටම සහභාගී වන්න.
Meanwhile, State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Channajaya Sumanam, announced today that the National Medicines Regulatory Authority has given the emergency approval for the use of the Russian-made Sputnik 5 vaccine.
රුසියාවේ නිෂ්පාදිත ස්පුට්නික් එන්නත සඳහා ජාතික ඖෂධ නියාමන අධිකාරිය විශේෂඥ කමිටුව ශ්‍රී ලංකාව තුළ හදිසි භාවිතය සඳහා අවසර ලබා දුන්නා. ඒ අනුව ලංකාව තුළ COVID-19 රෝගයට එරෙහිව එසේ අවසර ලැබුණු දෙවන එන්නත තමයි ස්පුට්නික් එන්නත. මේ එන්නත නිෂ්පාදනය කරන්නේ රුසියානු රජයට අනුබද්ධ ගැමීලිය ආයතනය. මේ වෙනකොට රාජ්‍ය ඖෂධ නීතිගත සංස්ථාව එම ගැමීලිය ආයතනය සමග සාකච්ඡා කරගෙන යනවා. හැකි ඉක්මනින් ස්පුට්නික් එන්නත ශ්‍රී ලංකාවට ගෙන්වා ගැනීම සඳහා අප බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. ඉදිරි සති කිහිපය ඇතුළත ස්පුට්නික් එන්නත අපේ රටට ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි කියලා. අප මීට පෙර ලබා දුන්න ඔක්ස්ෆර්ඩ් ඇස්ට්‍රාසෙනිකා එන්නත නැවැත්වීම සඳහා කිසිම බලාපොරොත්තුවක් නැහැ. ස්පුට්නික් එන්නතත් ලබාගෙන හැකි ඉක්මනින් එන්නත් කරන වැඩපිළිවෙල ඉදිරියට ගෙන යාම තමයි අපේ බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ. ස්පුට්නික් එන්නතත් මාත්‍රා දෙකක් හැටියට ලබා දිය යුතුයි. යම් කාලපරතරයක් සහිතව ඒ වෙනුවෙන් අපේ සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශ නිලධාරීන් මේ වෙනකොට සැලසුම් සකස් කරගෙන යනවා.
In other developments, Director of the Allergy, Immunology and Cell Biology Unit at the University of Sri Jayawardhanapura, Dr. Chandima Jeevandara, says that a study is currently being conducted to identify the immune response of the human body to COVID-19.
These days we are conducting a research study to identify the immune response to COVID-19 infection. One group belongs to those who acquire the infection naturally, and the other group belongs to those who receive the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So we are trying to identify the development of immune response among them. So when we say there are two main arms which provides immunity to a viral infection, one arm is the T cells, the other one arm is the antibodies. During this research study, we try to identify the T cells and antibody response to natural infection as well as vaccine-induced states. So the patient we are recruiting today has completed 1 year following a natural infection. So we wanted to identify the persistence of antibodies after 1 year. So because that data is important to determine the risk of a reinfection if it is. Those are the information that we are trying to gain from this patient, the sample we received today. Also, we will compare the vaccine responses between vaccines, and we'll compare it with the natural infection. That information is crucial in determining future health policy planning. Our population may be unique to the rest of the world because we have not observed much of complications among our patients compared to the Western world and America. Our death rate is significantly lower than the others. We might have some natural protection which we don't know, which we are yet to define from this research study.
In the meantime, with 399 persons successfully recovering from the coronavirus today, the country's overall recoveries rose to 80,836. As such, overall active COVID-19 cases currently stand at 3,461.
Sri Lanka's best health insurance with the fastest claim settlement. Soft Logic Life.
Pay just 500,000 rupees to reserve your unit today. Mulberry Residence.
Speaking at a live stream event hosted by the World Bank Group, head of the Presidential Task Force for National Development and Vaccination Plan, Lalit Weeratunga, stated that Sri Lanka's only constraint remains securing regular vaccine supplies. He added that Sri Lanka has had no hiccups with its vaccination plan, as the local healthcare infrastructure has always been geared for nationwide rollouts such as this.
We want to ensure that everybody above 30 will be vaccinated as early as possible. But of course, the constraint would be a regular supply. And so we hopefully await support from the COVAX facility, and then of course contractual support from the Serum Institute. And that is the first vaccine that was approved by the National Medicine Regulatory Authority. We need that approval. We just heard this morning that the Sputnik was also approved by the NMRA. So we are awaiting the continuous supply so that we would be able to vaccinate the working population as early as possible. With Sri Lanka's excellent infrastructure, that is the health infrastructure which we are very proud of, going right down to the village level where we have even a health worker at that level who are trained to vaccinate people because they have been doing that for a long period of time. The rollout is very easy. In fact, we did not have to go through any special training. And with this particular vaccine, of course, we also did not have to go through any special cold chain facilities because we had everything at hand. And we don't foresee many issues at the moment. We don't see any adverse reactions from our population. And also we don't see any hesitance, which is very important. I mean, we did not have a communication plan at all because we didn't need it, because people were very eager, and we saw that the rollout has been extremely good and peaceful, except of course in one or two places where we had certain hiccups.
The much anticipated guidelines for the transportation and burial of COVID-19 victims was issued last night by Director General of Health Services Dr. Asela Gunawardena. Accordingly, relatives of the deceased are informed to make a written request for burial without any delay. Only 2 relatives are permitted to be witnesses of the burial procedure, subject to strict health measures. The government last week put an end to the months of opposition against mandated cremations of COVID-19 deceased by gazetting permission to carry out burials of COVID-19 deceased. Shortly after this, a special committee identified the island of Iranathiu as a suitable location for burials to be conducted. The move, however, has met with opposition from the residents of Iranathiu Island, which is home to 165 families who staged a protest citing a threat to their water resources. Meanwhile, the guidelines to be adhered to in the transportation and burial of COVID-19 victims was issued last night, signed by the Director General of Health Services. According to the guidelines, relatives of the deceased must inform the chief health official of the area where the death occurred and submit their request to bury the deceased without delay. After this, the director or head of the relevant healthcare institution is then expected to obtain a written request from the relatives for the burial procedure. The director or the head of the relevant healthcare institution must then include Iranathiu Island as the place of burial in the death declaration form, after which the relatives will be required to provide the coffin. The director or the head of relevant healthcare institution has been placed in charge of transporting the corpse in the coffin to the Institute of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology in Colombo or the Valikada Base Hospital, where the corpse will be accepted by a designated officer. The designated vehicle will then depart with the remains at 5:30 am from the designated receiving centre to the Nachikuda pier. Prior to departure, designated health officials clad in PPE suits will allow relatives to view the remains and conduct religious activities under mandated health guidelines. Only 2 relatives will be allowed to witness the burial at Iranathiu Island. However, as the guidelines stipulate, no COVID-19 positive family members will be allowed to do so. According to the guidelines, making video calls, taking photographs or recording videos will not be permitted within the premises of healthcare institutions. The guidelines also clearly stipulate that the coffin will not be opened during the burial process and that relatives will not be permitted to handle the coffin. The special guidelines also stipulate that the bottom of the grave must be at least 2 meters above the water table in the area. For further coordination, the 2 family members who will travel to Iranathiu are requested to contact the Director of Medical Technical Services, Dr. Anwar Hamdani, on 077 1214 131. More news on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.
නිවසේ මෙවැනි මතු පිට රැඳෙන විස බීජ 99.9%ක්ම විනාශ කරන විම් ක්ලීනර්ස්.
Welcome back. In more news, the charge sheet filed by the Attorney General against former Minister Partali Champika Ranawaka over a near-fatal hit-and-run case in 2016 was read out in open court today. The indictment by the Attorney General was served on charges of reckless driving and failure to prevent an accident. Meanwhile, the Attorney General has filed another case in Colombo High Court accusing MP Partali Champika Ranawaka, driver Dilum Thusitakumara and former OIC of the Valikada Police Sudat Asmadala of fabricating evidence in connection with the incident. On February 28, 2016, a youth sustained serious injuries when his motorcycle collided with a jeep belonging to Minister at the time, Patali Champika Ranavaka in Rajagiriya. A friend of the injured motorcyclist told police that it was the minister who was driving the vehicle at the time, but a driver employed by the former minister surrendered to police, claiming that he was behind the wheel during the incident. After being produced before the Colombo traffic courts, the driver Dilum Tusitakumara was fined and released. However, friends of the injured youth continued to insist that it was the former minister who was behind the wheel. Accordingly, the Colombo Crimes Division reopened the case in 2019 and arrested the former MP. During investigations, the driver later confessed in court that he was not behind the wheel at the time and that he surrendered to the Boralla police on the former minister's instructions. Accordingly, following investigations by the Colombo Crimes Division, the Attorney General took steps to file indictments against former Minister Patali Champika Ranavaka in the Colombo High Court. He has been charged with reckless driving and failure to prevent an accident, failure to report an accident to the police, causing serious injuries to a youth owing to reckless driving and speeding, and fleeing without admitting the injured youth to a hospital. The case was taken up before Colombo High Court Judge Namal Valalle this morning, and the indictment filed by the Attorney General was read out to the accused MP in open court. The victim Sandeep Gunawardena attended court proceedings for the first time since the court began hearing the case. The attorney representing the former minister informed court that his senior counsel intends to file a preliminary objection challenging the court's indictment on the grounds that the High Court has no jurisdiction to hear the case. Meanwhile, Deputy Solicitor General Dileep Pieris argued that such objections can only be filed at the outset of the case. The Deputy Solicitor General also pointed out that the accused has already been served with the relevant charges, an indictment has already been served, and he has also been granted bail. After considering the submissions, the date for the hearing of preliminary objections was set for the 27th of April. In addition, the Attorney General has filed another case in the Colombo High Court, accusing MP Patali Champika Ranavaka, driver Dilum Tusitakumara and former OIC of the Valikada Police, Sudat Asmadala, of fabricating evidence in connection with the accident. In the months of March and April, the Parliamentary Committee on Public Expenditure plans to summon officials of 8 public institutions to answer questions. Some of the institutions include the People's Bank, Lanka Mineral Sand Company and the Development Lotteries Board.
The Parliamentary Committee on Public Expenditure has released its schedule for the months of March and April, where it expects to question officials of 8 state institutions. The 12-member Committee on Public Expenditure is tasked with examining the accounts of public corporations and any business undertaking vested in the government. With that, the committee will discuss the environmental audit report on plastic imports, usage management and post-usage in Sri Lanka on the 9th of March 2021. Further, on the 23rd of March, officials of the Lanka Mineral Sands Company are scheduled to appear before the committee. Meanwhile, on the 24th of March, the committee will be presented with a performance evaluation report on the process of establishing new export processing zones. In addition, the Postgraduate Institute of Science of the University of Peradeniya is scheduled to be summoned on the 26th of March. On the 6th of April, the Geological Survey and Mines Bureau has been summoned, while the Land Reform Commission will appear before it on the 7th of April. On the 20th of April, the committee is scheduled to probe past irregularities at the Sri Lanka National Film Corporation. In the meantime, the People's Bank and the Development Lotteries Board will be summoned before it on the 21st and 23rd of April, respectively.
Chief of the Air Staff of the Indian Air Force, Air Chief Marshal Rakesh Kumar Singh Bhadauria says that mutual defence cooperation between Sri Lanka and India will continue to rise and grow from strength to strength. He made these comments while addressing the media during his meeting with Army Commander General Shavindra Silva at the Army headquarters this morning.
Chief of Air Staff of the Indian Air Force, Air Chief Marshal Rakesh Kumar Singh Bhadauria, who is currently in Sri Lanka on a 4-day goodwill during the 70th anniversary of the Sri Lanka Air Force, called on Army Commander General Shavindra Silva at the Army headquarters this morning. The visiting Indian Air Force Chief was welcomed with a guard of honour, according to military traditions. The meeting between the Indian Air Chief and Sri Lanka Army Commander largely centred on existing bilateral cooperation and relations between both organizations, as well as with the Sri Lanka Air Force. Addressing media, Air Chief Marshal Singh Bhadauria assured that mutual defence cooperation between Sri Lanka and India will continue to rise and grow from strength to strength.
our defense cooperation has really been on the rise, and the basic bedrock of our defense cooperation is the blood and toil of our soldiers and a lot of history of mutual relationship and visits and training exercises over decades that has brought us to where we are. From the Air Force side and on behalf of all three defense services, I can assure the Chief of Defense Staff that our trajectory of mutual defense cooperation will continue to rise. I'm sure our relationship will grow from strength to strength, and from our side you will find that whatever is required, be it training, be it mutual visits, exercises, or build-up of relationship on the defense, we will find us forthcoming on every front, and I see this relationship really going higher.
We'll return after this short commercial break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. In more news, the Hambantota International Port recently launched marine bunkering operations that had been delayed due to the first wave lockdown. Speaking to First at 9, Chief Operating Officer of the Hambantota International Port Group, Tissa Wickramasinghe said that this project has the potential to establish the port as a global energy hub. He also outlined plans to serve as a liquefied natural gas supplier in the near future as well.
Marking another major milestone, the Hambantota International Port recently launched bunkering operations. Partnering with Sinopec Fuel Oil Lanka Limited, who won the bid to operate the Hambantota oil tank terminal and provide bunkering facilities in 2019, the company initially planned to begin bunkering operations in the fourth quarter of that year. However, it was then decided to commence operations between March and April last year, with 25,000 tons of low-sulfur fuel oil imported in April. However, the project could not be launched due to the island-wide lockdown during the COVID-19 first wave. Having commenced the project last month, Lanka Marine Services was the port's first customer. Accordingly, Lanka Marine Services supplied IMO 2020 compliant very low sulfur fuel oil to a crude oil tanker MV Suez Hans that was en route to the Suez Canal from Chennai. The tanker was refueled at the Hambantota port anchorage through oil barge MV Kumana. Speaking to First at 9, Chief Operating Officer of the Hambantota International Port Group, Tissa Wickramasinghe says that this project brings a new dimension to the country's bunkering operations.
What we did initially after taking over the tank farm was to refurbish and bring the tank farm up to Lloyd's classification standards. The main value that we bring into Sri Lanka with this is the fact that for the first time in Sri Lanka, the Sinopec Fuel Oil Lanka company is able to export IMO 2020 compliant fuel out of Sri Lanka. So with this, we are bringing in a totally new dimension into the marine bunker industry of Sri Lanka. That is done with a view to enlarge the business regional market share of Sri Lanka.
Wickramasinghe added that the company has now received an inflow of fresh inquiries from both active and inactive bunker suppliers in the country following this.
If you take the numbers for the last decade or so, the Sri Lanka market was averaging around 600,000 tons per annum. We hope to move to the million-ton barrier within a very short period. The first operation took place a couple of days ago, and it went off very smoothly. Now we are getting inquiries from all licensed bunker suppliers. Even the inactive bunker suppliers in Sri Lanka are now talking to us on how best they could benefit from this service. So we believe that this is another major step we have taken towards establishing Hambantota International Port as an energy hub.
Further, he revealed that the port is now gearing up to become a liquefied natural gas supplier in the near future.
As to what we have achieved on the energy side, we have started the LPG operations 1.5 years ago. We started the bunker operation just this month, and very soon in the near future, we hope to go into LNG storage and LNG facilities. LNG, as you know, is the next green fuel that is being mooted by the maritime industry and the IMO. So we expect to be ready as an LNG supplier as well in the future.
In business news, Governor of the Central Bank, Professor W.D. Lakshman, told media today that Monetary Board has decided to continue with its accommodative monetary policy stance with no change in lending or deposit rates. He also stated that the bank has also taken measures to create a current account surplus and that international financing options have been looked at as well. The central bank governor stated that there is no reason for Sri Lanka to default on its debt repayments.
Central Bank's Monetary Board reaffirmed its commitment to continuing its accommodative monetary policy stance. With that, the board has decided to maintain the central bank's current standing deposit facility rate and standing lending facility rate at their current levels of 4.5% and 5.5% respectively. With that, Central Bank Governor Professor W.D. Lakshman held a media briefing today to announce its decisions.
The economy is still recovering from the downturn. The need is first revival, take the economy out of and then work towards the growth of the economy. Other conditions are created to promote investment. The main monetary policy instrument for this is a low interest rate regime and also market liquidity for banks, and also requesting the banks to increase their lending for productive activity. The board also noted two key factors. The first is the need to channel bank credit towards sectors that could generate high growth and sectors that have potential but are still underfunded. The second factor to be noted is the uptick in certain market rates, such as the government securities yields, which is not in line with the monetary policy stance. Although we do not expect a further decline in market interest rates at this juncture, we certainly do not expect them to increase either in near future. The central bank has actively facilitated a series of discussions amongst public and private stakeholders in the broad merchandise export sector, apparel sector, tea, rubber and coconut sectors, then tourism sector, IT sector, gem and jewelry sector, and also with stakeholders involved in foreign employment and remittances, as well as direct and portfolio investment promotion. The response of stakeholders has been very promising. The impediments and bottlenecks that are holding them back will be addressed on an accelerated basis. We have already taken direct measures to absorb a part of the real inflows into the official reserve. The intention is to move towards a current account surplus. We will also continue to pursue foreign financing options. We have already seen positive responses from several counterparts. Our message is that Sri Lanka has never defaulted in the past, and there is neither an intention nor reason to do so in the future as well.
With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Have a good night.